When you begin learning a new language, it's absolutely critical that you start things off on the right foot and spend your first 3 months wisely. As they say, a good start is half the battle. Hi, my name is Luca from Lampariello.com, and today I'm going to talk to you about the 10 things I do whenever I start learning a new language. I set a starting date and stick to it. It's not uncommon to meet people who say that they want to learn a new language or that they've even decided to start learning one. However, when you ask these people when they're actually going to get started learning, they usually don't have an answer for you. They give you vague answers like someday or soon or as soon as I'm done with final exams. And then when it comes down to it, they never actually start. This is probably the greatest and most common sin of language learning. Never actually starting to learn, even though you know you want to. The cause of this, of course, is procrastination. Just like exercising, eating right, and learning an instrument, we all know deep down that language learning is a challenge, and so we try to trick ourselves into putting it off forever. I can fall victim to this too. That's why, whenever I decide to learn a new language, I take the time to fix an actual start date for my learning and put it on my calendar. In my case, I like to begin learning languages in September. It's an old habit back from my school days, since September is when each new school year would start. In your case, all you need to do is to pick a start date that is significant for you. It can be any date or any time of year, so long as you stick to it. Again, the purpose of setting a date is to beat procrastination, to give yourself a sense of urgency, of motivation, and of starting a new, exciting adventure. Once you set such a date, you know that there's no going back. You're going to learn your target language, and it's going to happen on that date circled right on your calendar. I use Timeboxing to schedule my daily learning. Language learning is a long journey. When starting out on the journey, it's easy to look out on the vast distance in front of you and become overwhelmed with just how much work there is to do before you reach your goal. Fortunately, there's an easy antidote to this feeling: a daily action plan. You see, though the journey is intangibly long, it is made up of smaller parts that are much easier to understand: days, weeks, and months. Of these, the most important is the day. If you can master your daily language learning schedule and do that over and over and over again, then reaching your long-term goal is just inevitable. And when I say mastering your schedule, I just mean finding a set amount of time every day in which you can learn and practice your target language. I do this through an easy technique called timeboxing. I'll break down my day into fixed blocks of time, usually ranging from 30 to 60 minutes. And when I start a new language, I make sure that my learning time gets the most special block of the day, the first 30 to 60 minutes after I wake up. Even at the beginning, a new language does not have to demand any more time than that, unless you want to. I visualize my future self using the language. Motivation is one of the most important resources in any language learner's arsenal. However, it's not always easy to come by. Even if you start learning with enthusiasm, that single burst of motivation is not likely to last very long, especially once learning becomes more challenging. As I said earlier, language learning is a long journey. To reach fluency and beyond, you need to be able to create enough motivation to fuel your learning over the long term. To create the motivation I need to start learning and keep learning a new target language, I use a technique called visualization. Visualization is the act of using your imagination to project yourself into the future and imagine what life will be like when you've attained a specific goal. When I use visualization, I imagine myself as a highly skilled learner of my target language. I picture myself traveling to where my target language is spoken, having lively conversations with natives, and making deep and compelling friendships. Through visualization as a mental tool, I don't just picture a few compelling images and call it a day. Instead, once I've imagined those future scenarios, I write them down in my notebook and keep those notes with me as I study. Once I have my visualization written down, it serves as an endless source of motivation, which is just as useful far along my journey as it is in the very beginning. It keeps me focused on my compelling future and gives me the boost I need to keep going, even when learning is difficult. Choose one interesting resource to start with. Thanks to the internet, it's almost too easy nowadays to fall into the trap of spending hours and hours and hours looking for the best possible beginner resource and never actually deciding which one to use. Even worse, it's even possible to buy too many resources and then spend all of your time switching back and forth between them, never confident which one you're actually going to stick with for the long term. I combat this problem by restricting myself to spending only a short amount of time looking for resources before starting. After I've done an hour or two of research into the kinds of resources I like to use, I pick one resource and then begin my learning. On top of all that, I avoid the trap of endlessly switching between resources by making a pledge. Put simply, I promise myself to use my one chosen resource for at least 3 months before moving on to something else. This gives me enough time to fully test out the resource and absorb the knowledge or skills that the specific resource is trying to teach me, without getting distracted by all of the other shiny resources out there. I minimize distractions. To learn something well requires your full focus and attention. This is something we may all intuitively understand, but in reality, it's easier said than done. In today's digital age, we are almost constantly distracted 100% of the time. At any moment, the majority of us are under attack by a deluge of phone calls, emails, text messages, Instagram notifications, and advertisements. They come from all directions as well. Any internet-connected device, be it your phone, tablet, smartwatch, or even your ebook reader, has the potential to bury you in distracting notifications. If you want to seriously make progress in the new language you've chosen to learn, you need to figure out how you're going to protect yourself from all of these distractions. Personally, I'm a bit of a digital minimalist. When I sit down for my daily language learning session, I don't use my phone at all. I do use my computer, but only for audio playback. If for some reason I absolutely have to use a web browser, I make sure to close or minimize any distracting tabs. For everything else, I like to go old school and stick to paper and pencil. I take a lot of notes when I learn, and I really enjoy writing things by hand. Doing this really helps me keep focused, and learning in this way has none of the potential drawbacks that learning with apps or computer programs tends to have. In general, if you're starting out learning a new language, then you need to train your focus muscle. You can start doing this by keeping your phone and computer in do not disturb mode while you learn, and even by blocking Facebook and social media on your phone. The combination of eliminating potential external distractions and purposefully trying to stay more focused will help you get more value from each learning period and help you waste less of your valuable time. If you'd like to learn more about staying focused and minimizing distractions, then I've included links to a few resources in the description box, so make sure you check those out. I write my notes by hand. When you sit down to learn, it may seem faster to type out your notes rather than write them by hand. However, typing requires you to remain in close proximity to your computer and phone. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, interacting with technology while learning can expose you to dozens upon dozens of distracting notifications. Writing notes by hand may seem like the slower, less fancy option, but in truth, it has a number of surprising benefits. First, though handwriting takes more effort than typing, the extra physical work that goes into handwriting can actually help you focus on the details that you're actually committing to the page. Studies have actually proven that the physical act of handwriting can help you memorize what you're learning more effectively. And since language learning requires a lot of memorization, every little bit helps. Of course, there are still serious benefits to having digital notes. I, for example, keep my most important notes filed away in a series of Google Docs, but the trick here is to write your notes by hand first and convert the most important stuff to digital stuff later. I tackle pronunciation from the very beginning. Pronunciation can be one of the most difficult parts of learning any language, but it's generally the most important. Why? Because if no one can understand what you're saying, then it doesn't really matter how many words you know, does it? Good pronunciation skills are essential for effective communication in any foreign language, and that's why I personally focus on them from the very beginning. I've also learned the hard way what can happen if you don't prioritize pronunciation. Back when I was learning Swedish, I had ignored a key feature of the Swedish sound system, something called pitch accent, and to this day my pronunciation still suffers a little bit. Why do I still struggle? Because pronunciation skills are, at their core, just a series of physical habits that are formed over time. If you develop the habit of pronouncing something in the wrong way, as I did with Swedish, it becomes incredibly difficult to undo the habit later and then relearn it the correct way. Because of all that, I believe it's very important to focus on building the right pronunciation habits from your very first day of learning. Pay attention to the combination of consonants and vowels. Focus on these sounds in short sentences. Read and repeat out loud. Experiment. You can even use tools such as the IPA, that is the International Phonetic Alphabet, to help you learn to articulate specific sounds. I have left a link in the description box if you'd like to learn more. I use a learning method that works well for me. There are 1,000,000,001 language learning methods out there, possibly even more. As a beginner learner, it's daunting to see all the possibilities and avenues you can explore just to learn a single language, and then be expected to pick one, just one, to start with. But that's what you must do. At the start of your journey, the most important thing is to spend more time learning and less time deliberating over your options. To start, pick one method and commit to testing it out for a limited period of time, like 6 months or 1 year. Then, at the end of that period, think critically about how well that method worked for you. If you find that your chosen method worked, great. However, if it didn't work, then the next thing you need to do is pick a new method to experiment with for a period of time. It may seem tedious, but this trial and error process is something that every language learner must go through. This is because there's no one best method for every learner. Instead, different methods work well for different people. In my case, I've been learning languages for 30 years. It took me several years of learning and experimenting before I stumbled upon my bidirectional translation method, which I now use to start every new language I learn. However, even that method isn't fixed. I revise it constantly and it evolves with each new language. So, if you want to find the method that works best for you, then you need to do something similar. Experiment, try new things, and reflect on how different techniques work for you. After a while, you'll become much more in tune with how you learn, and you'll be able to find your ideal language learning method as a result. I focus on getting exposure to the language first, and then I worry about grammar. Most people who have attempted to learn languages in school tend to see grammar as the most important thing to learn as a beginner. As a result of my years of practice, I disagree with this heavily. When I begin a new language, the most important thing is to get daily exposure to enjoyable and comprehensible input in my target language. I need to hear how the language sounds, see how the words are written, and observe firsthand how native speakers use their mouths and body language to express themselves in the language. Following the famed Pareto principle, I spend at least 80% of all my learning time attempting to absorb this comprehensible input. The remaining 20% of time is what I use to focus on grammar. For example, I do occasionally look at grammar explanations online or in textbooks, but only when I need to clarify an obscure point or figure out something I could not understand just through context. The best thing about all this 80-20 balance between comprehensible input and grammar learning will actually require you to spend less time explicitly learning grammar over the long term. This is because the frequent exposure to interesting and comprehensible content will gradually train your brain to grasp grammar patterns implicitly, meaning that even if you do need to occasionally look at a grammar book to clarify something, you'll be able to grasp the concept much more quickly than you would otherwise. I keep a journal. Considering how long the language learning journey can be, I've always found it useful to keep track of the process by maintaining a language learning journal. This can be incredibly beneficial for many reasons. First and foremost, it helps me see my progress and keep an eye on just how much work I'm putting into my language learning on a daily basis. Secondly, it allows me to store notes and other observations that may be useful in the future. For example, if I find that a specific technique or resource is really benefiting my learning, then I make a note of it in my notebook. And then later on, when I review my notes to determine how to improve my learning method, see tip number 8, I can use that information to make positive changes in my technique and learning schedule. I recommend that every language learner keep a journal like this. It doesn't have to be super involved or take up too much of your time. Just spend 2 to 5 minutes writing down notes and observations in your notebook at the end of every learning session, and you'll be surprised just how much help those observations can be later on down the line. So there you have it. These are 10 of the most important things I do when begin learning any new language. The first few months of learning are the most delicate stage of the process. So implementing these techniques and strategies really helped me lay a solid foundation and get ready for the intermediate and advanced stages of my learning. If you implement these techniques, you'll be able to get off to a strong start as well. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please remember to subscribe or even share it with your friends. And if you want more information about anything I've discussed here, please take a look in the description box where I have even included an extensive article on this topic with more useful information and bonus resources. Again, and as always, thanks for watching.